esteemed TPM fellows, as am I, and I can't wait to just hear their experience. So Sharon, I'll kick it over to you to share some of your experiences.
Well, thank you, LaKisha, and good morning, everybody, or I guess we're now officially in the afternoon. I'm going to keep my comments brief, and I'm going to focus on things that are newer for us, because I think many of you have heard our story over time that we've successfully built a talent pipeline for electric line workers that has involved two key partnerships with community colleges in Michigan that we identified based on they had what we were looking for in terms of a program, and they each developed a one-year-long certificate directly feeding into our electric line worker jobs. Well, over the last 5 years, we've hired about 250 people from those two schools, and just at my company, and that's been a great success for us. But when we stopped and took a look at the data, what we found was that we had, out of 250, 5 minorities. That's not good. And so we did an intentional rethink on this past year and we went through a problem solving to try and get at root causes. And some of the challenge was that our program was way too long, that it was something that people couldn't sustain that commitment and to have equitable access to a year-long program. We worked with our union also because the quantity of people, we had a unique opportunity this year. We were upping our hiring to 100 external hires this year and each year for the next 5 years. And so that increase compared to historically about 50 per year, so doubling our new hire, it gave us an opportunity to relook at who our partners were. And the fact is that the two schools we had, I'm going to use the Michigan map. So one was up here, and if those of you know Michigan, there is no diversity right here, period. There's not. And then the other was in our capital in Lansing. And we felt good that Lansing was, center of the state. Everybody could get there. Well, no, they can't. And so what we've done is put a shorter program together that is 5 courses that people have to take. And the 5th one is an 11-week academy held at our facility in Marshall, Michigan. And that continues to be a challenge, getting people to that facility in Marshall. And I'll talk about that in a minute. However, by putting a shorter program together and going down to 5 courses that were kind of universal at all the community colleges, even though they're independent from one another and have their own curriculum, everybody had a safety course, everybody had basic electricity, everybody had a rigging course. There were a couple energy industry fundamentals, which is our course that we use nationally in the industry. And then this last final climbing class that we needed. The climbing class is what the company delivers in Marshall as an adjunct instructor for all of the colleges. And we expanded to 5 colleges and launched the program and are producing twice as many people. But to make it equitable, when we got to that point, we did 2 things. We partnered with organizations we put the programs, we selected programs in communities that had high diversity rates. So we were in much more urban communities than where we were with Lansing and Alpena. We went to Flint, we went to Detroit area, we went to Jackson, we went to Grand Rapids, and we have one in Muskegon. All areas that are in our service territory all have high levels of diversity in the population. Stood up the program very quickly, ran the first cycle, already have doubled our numbers in diversity in one pilot. And that's like, yay, victory. However, the numbers weren't as high as we thought that they would be. And so we've got some learning to do about how to be a better partner with the agencies in the communities in which we've stood up the program. The last 11 weeks, people need to live in Marshall during that 11 weeks. And we heard very clearly from our equity partners saying, people can't afford to move while they're in school to this little town, Marshall, in the middle of nowhere. So we went and we sought funding through a private foundation and were awarded $100,000 through a private foundation called the Dreammaker Fund, which is unique to the utility industry in Michigan. And we were able to support the cost of housing using the dorms of a college that's nearby our facility, pay for housing and for meals for any candidate who is able to make it into the climb school and who meets the ALICE guidelines, that is the United Way study done every year for people who are working poor, basically. And so that's our success story, is that we got that funding. We hope that it will help us in recruiting the fall batch of people coming in, so that we can let it be known at the front end that, in fact, this part of it, we've eliminated the barrier for you. These jobs pay $38 an hour. So when a person's done the entry level at the end of that 11 weeks, they're going to get $38 an hour and likely make six figures in their first year. And so that 11 weeks that we carry them, you know, that's the investment they make. Their families have to figure out how to survive that 11 weeks while they're in Marshall being trained. But we have some good community partners working with them on that. So that's really step 6 kind of work when you're looking at changing your model. There's a lot more I could talk about, but I'm going to suffice there, leave it at that, and pass it over to Cammie to maybe share some of her story.
Awesome. Thank you, Sharon. Thanks, LaKisha. So like all of you, this is an area of passion for me. So it's going to be really difficult to put this into a few minutes, but I'm going to do my best to keep this high level for you. So just a little bit of context building for where we are as the Arvada, Colorado Chamber. We launched TPM in 2017, and we went fast and furious and kicked off with 4 employer collaboratives in healthcare, construction and trade, STEM and manufacturing, and professional services. That aligned with our high demand industries for our community. And we were like, yay, let's go. So we got our employers around the table and went through the TPM process of assessing demand and skills and all of the things that we needed to know. And as we started doing that back mapping and looking at the value stream map, we realized how bad our system was. And it was kind of this heartbreaking moment for us in this process of saying, there's a lot of work to be done. And how do we go about doing this? But I think that the exciting part for us was that it was the employer-led mentality that was allowing us to have a space with our supplier partners around improving our talent pipeline locally. So at that moment, we launched what we call our Arvada Works CAPS Council. And when we say CAPS, it stands for Kick-Ass Problem Solvers. We also realigned our collaboratives to be called industry action teams. And we did all that with intentionality, because basically I'm sick of talking. We know there's a problem, let's drive solutions. And so we've aligned our language to support that. So what we've done with that CAPS Council is we've brought in a cross section of industry as well as supplier partners, so our workforce center, economic development, our community college, school leadership, along with industry sector leadership from each of our action teams. And I tell you all this because that has been such a critical piece for us of getting aligned and marching in the same directions toward shared performance measures, right? We had employers setting their measures and we loved that. We had a lot based on the early on side of the value stream map around career awareness and exploration, because we really had some major demand issues in our community. So we found a lot of our initial outcomes were actually outputs. Can we get students to say yes to an internship? And so shifting perspective of what outcomes we're trying to drive has been a challenging and an exciting prospect for us. So right now we're looking at lining with the Colorado Department of Higher Ed. They're working to have 66% of Coloradans with a post-secondary credential. We love that because we're looping in certification. So many of those employers that are at our action teams align with that because they need certifications no matter what they're in. Many of those are not college degrees. So that's been an exciting prospect. On number 6, the incentives, we've done quite a lot. Actually, one of the things I'm really excited about right now is we're working toward having a scholarship fund for high demand industries to help with that credentialing and attainment to get them into those industries. So that is employer-led vision, and it's been really exciting. So as I said, I could continue to go on, but I will stop so we can have a good dialogue. Thanks, everyone.
No, that was great. Thank you so much, Sharon and Cammie, for sharing those great experiences. And like Jamie mentioned, this really isn't about us, right? This is about using this time to network with each other and really share those experiences or challenges that you're having. So I want to open it up to the rest of you guys just to just share with us what kinds of challenges are you experiencing, or this is the opportunity to highlight some of your successes as well. So I'll stop talking as well and just kind of give everyone the floor. And be sure to throw any questions in the chat if you don't feel like speaking up.
I have a question as it relates to diversity. We're creating this cybersecurity and IT externship rotation with our cybersecurity and IT workforce collaboratives, which is going to be launched in June. And we had pitched to the employers that we wanted to facilitate this survey discussing demographics. And it would be an optional survey, but the idea was to get data and identify and measure the data so that we can better target certain populations if we're not meeting those populations. And we had some pushback. One of the questions was, what gender do you identify as? And then some of the employers were like, maybe we should say, what are your pronouns? And then the other employers are saying, why do we even need this question? And so I wanted to ask some of you all, how did you reconcile this kind of different perspectives? I feel that it's really important that we measure this data so that we can have a better idea of who to target and building these different community partners. And then also, are these and whether or not these demographic questions are really needed for these different programs. Any feedback would be really appreciated.
I can jump in with my experience. I helped our local, I'm in California, and I helped our local chamber kind of launch a diversity, inclusion, and belonging focus, both at the young professional level, but both chamber-wide as well. And we got some of the same questions, and I think that, very, very candidly, if you're not part of the LGBTQ community, it's not a question because a lot of our norms are centered or are heterosexually oriented. And so I got feedback that, oh my gosh, this isn't an invasive question. Why are we doing that? And how I explained it is that it's very important to signal to different communities that we see them and are excited to bring them into our fold and, excited to have them as part of the workplace. And I do think it's important to have a conversation, whether it's mild or a more serious one, about, are we all prepared to welcome people regardless of their gender identity? Something I've been recently struggling with, and I'll just put myself out vulnerably here because I know we're a TPM family, and if anyone else has had experience with this, about how to kind of frame the transgender question, because I have transgender friends who say, no, I'm female, and then other people who say, I want to identify as transgender female. So just want to put that out there to recognize that, like, sometimes there's different resources and different signaling, but it's important to show that you're engaged in the conversation. And on the race side, it helped with our signaling as well when we started asking those race questions, because we previously weren't collecting race data. The last survey suggestion that I want to just float to this group is, when I was doing my strategy for data collection around talent data, instead of saying, please select in this category race, in this category gender identity, we did one really, really big select all that apply section. So people could select ability status, veteran status, Black African American, this over here, female, instead of answer this question about this part of you and answer, which I don't, and Jason and Jamie may have warned you that I overshare and overtalk, so I don't mind selecting or answering any questions, but some people do, and to me that softened the ask a little bit. So just wanted to add that.
Can I connect with you after this so I can kind of see the survey and pick your brain a little bit more?
Yeah, I'll pop my info into the chat.
I also
go ahead, please. Go ahead, Sharon.
I just wanted to chime in and say there's something to be said for the speed of business on this and where they're at in their journey on the DEI spectrum. Self-identification within companies is really just starting to evolve in a lot of ways. I mean, when you look at the Diversity Inc. top 25 companies, those are big, big companies. But when you start talking about your small neighborhood community companies, this is a long ways off their HR radar. And I think that in some ways our TPM collaboratives can begin the conversation and help people on their journey, but you have to kind of meet them where they're at. You know, we're not going to drive people to check a box that they don't check already at their employer community. And a lot of the time employers are very careful about the data that they share and the data that they ask for. I loved Anna's comment about check all that apply, because, you know, there's a lot of them, and self-identification in abilities and in gender, in LGBTQ status plus is something that we're right now modifying all of our SAP systems on those to enable more of that. But I think we're kind of in the middle of the pack. We're not at the front end of it. And there's a lot of others who are way behind us. So that's my only other comment on that.
No, I think this is a really good conversation. I appreciate the question. It's DE&I has been something that I think even as we start, especially this year, as we've kicked off collaboratives, we've gotten more questions around, hey, are we, you know, is this process going to help us to further analyze our supply? If so, how do we start to build in DE&I? And I think we're just at the cusp of educating employers about, like, what does that mean, right? So Sharon's comment about meeting employers where they are, it's so spot on, because your collaborative can become a source of education, right? It's not necessarily, and the way that I view TPM, it's not about us, right? Because we come to the table with our own personal filters and thoughts about things, but the beauty of TPM is that it is employer-led. So the fact that you can say, hey, let me provide more information around X, like what does a diverse workplace look like? You know, what does it mean to diversify? What are those steps? I think that can kind of create a change in terms of, you know, gender, race, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's education that we've done even here in Kentucky to get resources to employers to let them know, hey, there's a lot of tax credit or things that exist if you hire a more diverse workforce, even from the veteran population. You know, just there are things that exist. So I think education is going to be key as well. Other thoughts? Go ahead.
Yes, I just want to say, Anna, thank you for your comments. It's so great to see you. Anna and I were in the same cohort. I think we might have been the last full in-person group even, or something, right? But I just wanted to lift up the TPM Web Tool as well, right? Because I think we're all learning so much more on this DEI front, and it's critically become a priority for many companies who never really had the time, they thought, to get here. So I just wanted to ask the group, how effectively are you able to use the TPM Web Tool to get at some of this? Or are there opportunities for enhancement that we should be lifting up? Any thoughts?
I'll be candid with my construction collaborative. We used it, the web tool intermittently past strategy 3. They were just not they were just not getting on, not using it. And it's pretty funny. You have to learn the personality of your collaborative. I also really love the term that Cami lifted up, which is industry action. So the industry action committee or team. They really were not responsive to so much. The bigger the engagement, but right now we're in the process of asking them to fund a promise program at the community college level, and it's a 2-second conversation. But when I was trying to get them to the academy meetings, it took a while. So roundabout way of saying it was really difficult for us to keep them engaged. But I have really loved the TPM Web Tool as a visualization tool. To be very candid, my partners in the graphic design world, like, those softwares are expensive. And I'm really grateful that now my company has access to easy ways of displaying our talent data instead of battling it out in PowerPoint.
I will just stop to give Deb kudos because she brought to our attention the need to make sure that the back mapping survey would allow for users to designate both race and ethnicity and other questions of diversification. So kudos to you, Deb. Thank you for pushing us in that direction. And if there are other enhancements that we can make to make this work easier for you all, you know we want to do that.
I mean, we're all in this together, right? And I'm not sitting in your shoes anymore, Sharon, like trying to do this for a company. But I critically understand what it takes to try to drive change more quickly. And I think the web tool is such an awesome asset to this process. I just know in our limited experience in Minnesota, and Phil Ariano can tell you better than I, but it's been tricky to get people to use it effectively. And we've had some hiccups with, I think, the technology. And so I just wanted to see if it's just us or, you know, we probably just need more experience with it. So thank you.
No, thanks for bringing that up, Deb. I mean, let's be honest, the web tool is an art, right? There's an art and a science to the web tool. And I think to Jamie's point, any additional feedback around the web tool is always welcomed. And I know Olivia is always open to feedback and making any changes. And the web tool has absolutely improved from like 2 years ago, right? I mean, we got to celebrate those wins. It's a lot better than 2 years ago, but if there's things that come up, absolutely bring it to the forefront. So a couple things. So Cami in the chat, you are having similar challenges with your construction collaborative. Let's see. Yes, great point. All right, any other challenges when we think of strategy 5 and 6, or really just starting to build those pipelines and start managing those pipelines? What's coming up for you?
So I can always fill an empty space. I will say that in our energy collaborative, we have seen kind of a continuation of a theme where the biggest companies are still forming their own direct partnerships, and that they are creating their own talent pipeline using the data, using the standards, but they seem to have customers, we do anyway, have custom things that we want. And so we're going to be facing a moment of reckoning soon, because the state is financing or offering standard or grants for apprenticeship that requires that you reach agreement on a core, that you don't, everybody doesn't get their own special thing. And so I'm looking forward to calling the question again. We're a very unionized environment, and that tends to, and unfortunately we have IBEW and then the United Utility Workers of America, 2 different major unions, 2 major different utilities. And that likelihood of them coming together, I think, is only going to be made possible by agreeing to this smaller core, and that we would then bring people in sooner in their journey, which then undoes some of the issues or the savings that we as a company have been historically experiencing because of our pre-employment training program. We've been able to point to massive reduction in some costs because it's a shorter path to the level 2 of apprenticeship. And the more we have to train in-house, the more expensive it becomes. And then the union starts to say, if all those colleges are doing is those little bit of courses, we'll do that. And then before you know it, the old system of a secret doorway to get into a union is the only hatch into these jobs, and equity shuts back down again. And so there's, you know, it's complex, this stage of our development and maneuvering some of that. And I don't know if people have thoughts on it or if they've gotten to that point yet, but it's one of the things future oriented that I see a challenge around.
No, that's such a great point, Sharon. I'll just speak for just a few seconds because this is really about everybody else on the call. And I feel like you've heard Kentucky's story and, you know, Michigan and everybody else's story. But I think especially since COVID, and I don't know if anybody else is experiencing this, a lot of companies, I think a lot of our collaboratives pre-COVID really were starting to form, right? And started to move into strategy 4 and we're coming out of strategy 4 and really getting into the place of managing their pipelines. Through COVID, it's affected all of the businesses so differently. So, you know, whereas as a collaborative, you're like, all right, let's get consensus and move forward with this one solution. COVID has kind of splintered some collaboratives to be like, well, we're not focused on that right now. We want to do this, you know, so it's been tricky to figure out, well, am I creating, if we have 5 companies, for instance, am I creating 5 separate solutions for each of these companies? Like, how are we going to come together and create something really strong for the collaborative? So that's taken quite a bit of conditioning. And, you know, I think for the project managers, just from a local presence, at points, it felt like you were being pulled in different directions because everybody was still trying to figure out how to recoup after COVID. So I will say, just as a challenge, that's been a little difficult for some of our collaboratives to find their common ground again, especially as, you know, it's almost like one company for themselves coming out of COVID. So I don't know if anyone else is experiencing that. I think we're in a much better place, but initially it was hard getting back into strategy 5 post-COVID. I don't know if we can say post-COVID yet, but post-COVID. So.
I'll add to your point, LaKisha, for excuse me, for our team. Apologies for being off camera and for the barking. I'm going to kick the dogs out when I speak later in the breakout session. I have seen that particular instance, and I don't think it had anything to do with COVID. If you're attending the emerging industries session later, I'm going to talk about my biotech collaborative here in Kentucky. And one of the things that we've seen now that they're building solutions is they might be building similar solutions, but for their industry, it's a confidentiality aspect. They can't work together past a certain point because of confidentiality of what they're manufacturing at their pharmaceutical companies. So that was interesting for me. I mean, we're building very similar solutions, and they're kind of, you know, building their individual pieces from a foundation that they've built together, but they're definitely separated at this point as they build those programs. So.
No, that's a great point, Sarah, because it's very nuanced, but it does take a little bit of elbow grease, I think, especially with just a collaborative. When the data is rolling in, it's very easy to get employers excited about, like, whoa, this data is amazing, especially when you compare it against LMI. But when it gets down to the solution piece, it can get a little tricky to figure out what are we doing centrally as a collaborative versus what makes sense to do individually. So that's definitely something, as we've navigated quite a few collaboratives, that comes up. What else is out there? I know we're close to time. It's 37. Man, we killed that breakout room discussion. So I think as we get close to time, if there's any go backs or anything that you think is worthy to share in 3 minutes, you have the floor. No pressure though. It's only 3 minutes. So, I mean, I really am very excited to see what comes out of these discussions. I mean, I think we had a very healthy discussion around DE&I and how do we start navigating those conversations with our employer collaboratives. We also had very good just overviews of just where some of our states are with strategy 5 and strategy 6. And also just feedback around the web tool. Do we have what we need in the web tool to continue to sustain the growth that we have in our employer collaborative? So all really great discussion points. Please keep them coming. I know I'm always available for questions. I know Sharon Miller is, and I'm sure, of course, we all are, quite honestly. And I know Cami absolutely is. So please reach out to us if you have any questions. But Jamie, I will kick it back to you.
Yeah, I think you, like LaKisha said, you all had a lot of things that kind of converged for me. And you know, Anna highlighted the visualization tools within the web tool. And so much of that happens at this part of implementation. And the hope is that it would be useful to you as an organization, useful to your collaborative members, and then also useful to them as individual companies, because they can create those visualization tools to track performance for them as individual companies. But if that's not the case, or if you get this far and you're feeling like I really don't, I didn't use it necessarily as much as I wanted to for the data collection directly from the employers, but now that I'm on this performance collection piece, I think it might be helpful. We will again want to meet you all where you're at, and make sure that the resources, the support that we're providing is what you need at this stage of implementation, because it probably looks a whole lot different than you thought it would when you first went through the academy, however, many years ago, or started a collaborative that has had very different outcomes from other collaboratives that you formed. So I hope that you all know that the invitation is always there if you want to touch base individually with myself or Jason or Nikki or other leaders within the network. We're always certainly here for you guys, and we're excited to kind of share your successes too. So if any of you all are at a point in which you're like, I have a story to tell, like maybe it's not a perfect story. We don't expect everything to have worked out beautifully. As Sharon said, they have incredible performance to boast about, but they still went back and found, hey, we could do better. We found a challenge that we want to tackle. We need more diversification. Like, let's go back and figure out ways that we can improve that. Those are stories that are really important to tell. And we have the platform, we have the resources that we need to be able to help you all tell those stories. So all you have to do is let us know. We're eager to help and to boast about your organizations and the leadership roles that you all have taken on. So by all means, like, shoot me a note, let me know. You want a case study? I got your back. Or you need help with visualization tools? Let us know. We'll set up a one-on-one or just have a strategy session. That's something that we're always more than happy to do. So I welcome that. Jason, anything from you?
Nope, nothing to add. Thank you for everyone who contributed.
We'll see you guys back in the main room. Thank you. And thanks to LaKisha and Sharon and Cami.